Son, get up quickly. Dad's home, my mom called out, her voice filled with excitement. It was always a big deal when Dad returned from his business trips. He'd bring back all sorts of gifts, remote-controlled cars, toy sniper rifles, and even life-size toy guns that were almost as tall as me. But this time, he brought something even more exciting. A few minutes later, we were in my room with a box cutter. Dad, tired from the road but smiling, was unpacking a large, heavy box. Inside was a telescope. As soon as I saw a small part of it peeking through the bubble wrap, I knew exactly what it was and threw myself at Dad with a hug. "Do you like it?" he asked. "Yes, Dad." "Is it what you wanted?" "Exactly what I wanted. It's even cooler than the one my classmate Alex has." "I'm glad you like it," Dad said, ruffling my hair playfully. He left to join Mom, and I started examining my new toy, trying to figure out how to assemble it. I've always been a curious kid, and that curiosity often got me into trouble. I'd climb places I wasn't supposed to, like the fence into the military base near our neighborhood. I'd ask my parents and teachers weird questions, like why our town had a victory square but no defeat square. And I'd beg Mom for a telescope because I suddenly became fascinated with space after watching an American movie where a kid had one by his window. "Mom, Dad, what's that?" I'd asked. "It's for looking at stars and other planets," they'd explained. And now, out of the blue, Dad had fulfilled my wish. All that was left was to figure out how to set it up, which we did the next evening. Usually when Dad came back from a trip, I was allowed to skip school. Mom would prepare a feast, invite guests, and I'd have the whole day to myself. I made the most of it. By that evening, the telescope was set up on its tripod near my bedroom window. I had a rough idea of what I'd see through it, but Dad's gift was far better than Alex's. The quality was incredible, and that night, I didn't even go outside. I sat quietly in my room, staring at planets, stars, and the moon. It was mesmerizing. Even my parents, who were having a drink with their guests, were amused by my sudden interest, jokingly calling me a scientist. But, as is typical for kids my age, the novelty wore off after a few days. I'd seen everything there was to see through the telescope, and my interest waned. I'd set myself the goal of finding extraterrestrial life, or at least a UFO, but all my attempts failed. Soon I was back to school, homework, and playing with friends. The telescope gathered dust. That is, until the first real frost hit, and it got dark early. With little else to do, the telescope became my main source of entertainment. Occasionally, my best friend Mike would come over, or I'd go to his place. One evening, I decided to point the telescope not at the stars, but at the neighboring apartment building. It was an old 5-story building, just like ours, with similar residents. I started spying on them, fascinated by the idea of watching people who had no idea they were being observed. Someone was cooking in the kitchen, another apartment was hosting a party with music and dancing, and in one window a person sat on the windowsill watching the snow fall. The telescope allowed me to see every detail, moles, pimples, everything. And admittedly, I was most interested in watching the girls, especially on the upper floors, where they sometimes forgot to close their curtains. I saw things I shouldn't have, and of course I bragged about it to my friends at school. Some even asked to come over and take a look. But this harmless spying took a dark turn one night. After a week of observing the building, I noticed something strange. In one apartment on the third floor, the lights were always off. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe the residents were asleep, at work, or no one lived there. But one evening, as my parents were telling me to go to bed, I decided to take one last look through the telescope. That's when I saw movement in the dark apartment. The light from the apartment below faintly illuminated the window, and I noticed the dirty white curtain being pulled aside. I couldn't see who or what had done it, but the curtain moved sharply from left to right, sparking my curiosity. I wondered if they lived in the dark because they couldn't afford electricity, but after asking my parents about power disconnections, I dismissed that idea. Every evening after that, I pointed the telescope at that window. My fascination with the girls faded, replaced by an obsession with that dark apartment. My imagination ran wild. Maybe it was abandoned, or maybe a monster lived there, one that feared light and kept the apartment in total darkness. The thought scared me, and I'd often end my observations abruptly, hiding under my blanket. I noticed that the curtain's position changed every time I looked. Maybe someone did live there after all. Slowly, my strange obsession began to fade. But one day on my way to school, I glanced at the window. It looked awful. The glass was cracked, the frame was rusty, and the windowsill looked like it might crumble. The curtain wasn't in much better shape, stained and torn. If it weren't for the moving curtain, I'd have thought the apartment was abandoned. I convinced myself it was just some drunkards living there, and the lack of light was due to a wiring issue. My parents agreed when I brought it up. Maybe it's those drunks who were yelling under the windows the other day, Dad said. I went to check on them. Apparently there was a fire in their apartment and the wiring burned out. That's probably why they don't have lights. So you were scared of some drunks? Mom teased. I didn't argue, but I couldn't shake the image of the pale figure pressing against the window. That night, I checked the telescope again. The figure was still there, staring back at me. It wasn't a drunk. It wasn't even human. Somehow it knew I was watching. The next night, things got worse. I woke up feeling a strange presence. The smell of something foul filled the air, and I realized the front door was open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, and I heard raspy breathing. Why weren't my parents reacting? I peeked into their room and froze. In the darkness, I saw the creature sitting on their nightstand, holding my mom's severed head. The bed was soaked in blood, and Dad lay motionless beside her. I screamed, locked myself in my room, and barricaded the door. The creature pounded on it for what felt like hours before finally leaving at dawn. When the police arrived, they found my parents' bodies. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They said no one had lived in that apartment for over a year, and the previous tenants, homeless drunks, had killed each other. I was taken in by my mom's best friend, who raised me as her own. I spent years in therapy, but nothing helped. To this day, I'm terrified of looking into other people's windows, and I still sleep with the lights on.